There's several different methodologies for applying or building styles. This first example that I have on a slide here tells it that I want every H1. I'm modifying basically what the H1 tag does. I'm saying from now on, anytime the H1 tag is utilized, it's going to be used with an Arial font. Now, the example that I have down below, though, is a little bit different. When I create a tag, one of the things that I can do with any tag is I can go back and apply an ID. In the old days, we used to use what's called a name tag, and you'll see that some of my examples still have name tags in it. Name property and the ID property basically do the same thing. It names, just like you name a variable, you can name a particular tag. You can say that this H1 tag is my main heading tag, for example, if you want to, or you could say this paragraph is my main heading if you choose to. If that's the case, and we'll take a look at how that's implemented, you would then use a pound sign in front of it. And there's only going to be one tag that this applies to. You can only have one tag with a name main heading on it. But this tag right here says any tag that has the main heading ID, make that into an Arial font. Let's take a look at this example, CSS by ID. So here's the example of CSS Cascading Style Sheets by ID, and you'll notice up here that within the style tag I've got a style that is a Roman numeral 3, and I put a pound sign in front of that. So what the pound sign says is look for the tag down below that has an ID of the Roman numeral 3 on it and make that a background color of yellow and a foreground color of red. So if you look down the list here, you'll recall back in the early days of this class a couple weeks ago that what we did is we went back in and we named every one of the amendments. So Amendment 1 had an ID of I on it, and that was going to be for our hypertext links. So notice both of these guys exist in or have a name equals Roman numeral I and an ID equals. Really, today we really don't have to use the name any longer. That's really for old browsers. But when I originally created this demo, it was a couple of years ago, and I left the name in there, and it would still be good for older browsers. Not necessary today. But if you look down below here, here is the ID right here for 3. And there is the Roman numeral 3. There is the amendments with the Roman numeral 3 on it. And what that style up here says at the top is take this right here, just this text, anything between the opening A tag with the ID of Roman numeral 3 and the closing A tag, okay, which is, there's a missing closing A tag here, right here. Missing closing A. What if it's that way on the others? I might have to go down there and correct those. Nope, it's correct down below. Just that one tag was missing the A. Oops. I think I did that right. Okay, so opening A tag, closing A tag over here. There's the name of it. So if we look at this, you will see that only Amendments 3 has that yellow background and the red foreground on it. Now if I wanted to, I could apply it to a lot more. If I wanted to make every H2 become out that way, then instead of using it by name, I could apply it to every H2, just like that. Let's try this. Let's save it. And for some reason, it doesn't resolve that. So let's go back and re-resolve it again. See what impact this is going to have on our page. Oops. There we go. Now, every H2. So I have a choice, again, one or all, using the example that I just used. Let's jump back over to the slides here. Continue on. Now, another way that you can implement it is with a class. So far we've seen how to go back in and say, every version of this tag I want to have this style. You've also seen how we can go back in and say this tag with this name, this specific tag, I want to change the style. Now what we have is the ability to go back in and customize a particular tag. Instead of having one P tag, I might want to make a different versions of the P tag. In this example I have on the slide here, I might want to make a version, oops, let's go back, of the P tag here that I want to call main heading. Okay. Now by me going back in there and adding this style that we see right here, what I'm telling it is every P tag that has a class of main heading I want to have as a red color. So not every p tag is going to change. Only those p tags that have the word that class equals. So we're going to have a tag that says class equals, just like you see here. That is what's going to implement it. Okay, but it's only going to work on p tags. I can't have an h1 tag that says class equals main heading, because right here in the definition I'm saying only p tags with the main heading class. So it lets me reuse this tag over and over and over again, but it only belongs, as I said, to that p tag. Now, what I can do is I can create what's called a free floating style. If I don't add it to any tag right here, so if I just create it as period main heading, what I'm doing is I'm creating a class that I can use any place I want to use it, but at this point it doesn't specifically belong to anything. So I could apply this class to an h1 tag, to a p tag, to a ul tag, to a table, to anything that I want to apply it to individually. It makes this a pretty versatile tag right here. Let's take a look at an example of that one. So that would be class right here. So at the very top of this code, I've done a couple of things. So first thing I did is I said heading 1 tags are all going to be centered from this point forward, all heading tags. Then I created a class called standout that belongs to the p tag. So how do I create a class? It's just p period and name of the class I want to create. And I said anytime I apply standout to a p tag, a class, I want to have white color on a black background. That's going to be what we see over here on the right hand side. Then what I did is I created another free floating class. That class can be applied to anything, and I called it dot headings. And dot headings I made a color red and a background color of yellow. Now, how do I implement it? Well, since standout can only be applied to a p tag, okay, then let's take a look. Right down here is what I did. I applied standout to this tag where Congress shall, and that's what you ended up with right here. Okay, it went back up here, looked for the class name. So think of the class as a group. Doesn't have to be a single tag. Okay, but this standout only belongs to a p tag. If I had gone back in and applied standout to an, let's try a different tag. Let's do an h2 here. So if I do class equals standout. Okay, and let's put quotation on this one. Okay, let's save it. And then I wonder if I can just refresh over. I see I have a mistake up here too. Let's correct that. So let's reload the page. That didn't work, so we'll have to review it again. And I see right now where my error is. Okay, notice it did nothing. It had no impact down below when I applied standout to the H2, which is this guy right here. And the reason is because standout does not belong to that. But what I can do now is, let's go back up here. This heading tag right here. I can apply this heading tag, which is going to be yellow and red, to anything. Any tag I want, because I haven't given ownership to a specific tag over here. So if I came back over here to this guy right here, and I decided I want to apply headings, okay, right off the bat, see how the headings changed, and I could do it to the next one too. I could come back here. In fact, let's do it on a p tag. I could do the p tag, and I say class equals headings. I spell headings right. And again, notice immediately that it resolved that and it turned it to a red. So there's places for everything. If you know for a fact that the style you're going to put only belongs to that tag, then do this. Just apply it to that tag. P tag, H1 tag, whatever. Now, by the way, before I go on, I mentioned earlier that H1 tags are not standard among all different browsers. Later we're going to find out that there is a font size that I could use and specify in my embedded or external style all my H1s are going to be a font size perhaps of 20, and that overrides that incompatibility we talked about earlier. We'll get to that here in just a little while. What I want you to take out of this, though, is that concept of these classes and how the class works. you can, and this is an example of a class name. It's a version of the P tag. So I'm creating a special P tag I call standout. The only time standout will ever work, like you see down here, is when it's implemented with the parent tag, which is the P tag. This example down below here, that's a free floating tag. That means I can apply that to anything I want to apply it to. In fact, check this out. I could actually go back in here, and because I'm lazy, I'm going to copy this out. And I want headings. So if I grabbed headings here, and I applied that to the body tag, check this out. Oops. Try that again. Grab the headings class. Should have probably just typed it in. Okay, come back up to my body tag and apply it there. It affected the entire page. Because, and remember how the inheritance works, is every tag inherited unless that tag was changed individually, and that's exactly why this guy didn't change, is because everything from this point on was yellow, but the moment that it hit standout, standout changed it just for that P tag, and when the P tag closed, it reverted back to that yellow background again. So what if you want to apply the same style to multiple different tags? What this tag does here is it allows me to go back in, and I think I talked about this once before, but this will allow me to go back in and apply the same style to a variety of different tags, and each tag is treated individually. I'm sure I talked about this once before. So I've got the P tag. This is not the inside tag. This does not say when the H5's inside of H2 is inside of H1. With the commas in between it rather than spaces, it says, look, make the P tag Sagio UI font. Make the H1. This just saves us from having to do each line individually. So now let's start talking about some of the individual tags that we're going to be dealing with. We've looked at the 3 different variations of style sheets and how to apply them, inline, embedded, and external. We took a look so far at different ways that we can use these tags. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go back in and take a look at the different styles that we could utilize. Get to know them. Now, there's no way, folks, that we're going to cover all that vast plethora of styles that exist out there. But I will take you and show you how to research them out, which I would expect you to be able to do. I will point out some of the more common type examples. And the first one we're going to take a look at here is font weight. So let's spend a little bit of time and talk about some of the more common styles that we might utilize. The first one I want to take a look at is how to bold something, a bold print. And we're going to use the font weight property to do that. But let's talk a little bit about bold. In the early days of HTML, we used to use what's called a bold tag, and that was simply a B tag, and we'd surround whatever we wanted to have bolded with that B tag. The B tag has been deprecated, which means Microsoft has got rid of that tag and they've replaced it with the strong tag. Now, as of right now, when you apply the strong tag and surround it with something, it actually will go and bold print that area. The problem with that is that violates that separation of responsibilities that we've been referring to. Separation of responsibility meaning HTML does the raw text, CSS does the formatting. And you're going to find there's several tags that are going to violate that a bit. The strong tag is one of those, but what we can do later is we can make the strong do whatever we want it to do. We can say this strong tag is going to be this bold. We can make it really bold or less bold. We can make different variations, as we talked about a minute ago, using an ID tag and have different variations of the strong tag. I might want to create a class that is dot light bold and another one maybe dot dark bold and apply it on anything wherever I want. And it doesn't have to be on a strong tag. We'll find out that I can apply that on any tag that I want to. So let's go back over here to the W3 schools because they've got some really good examples, some basic examples of all of these tags that we're dealing with here. So let me see if it'll let me take it there. So the font weight, we're going to talk a little bit in a minute about this website, but this is a great place to start off with. And you'll notice that what's happened in here is rather than create a free floating class, they're creating different variations of the P tag. He's going to, or she, when they created it, created a tag called P normal with his normal print. They've got another one they call P thick, and a last one they call P thicker. Now, font weight has a couple of different settings out there. You can set your font between, I believe, 1 and 900. Let me double check down here. 1 and 900. 1 being the thinnest, 900 being the most bold font that you deal with out there. You can use normal. Now, why in the world would you want to set normal? Well, let's say the entire paragraph that you're dealing with is already bold and you just want one section that's not bold. You can use this same property and tell it turn the bold off for this region. Then you have the standard bold, you have bolder, you have lighter, and then you have the 100, like I said, to 900 that we can take a look at. Let's look at what they'll do for us. So as we click over here, they're going to show us which each one of these properties are going to do. So if I click in normal, I end up with, this is my style sheet, here's what my text looks like. If I do a bold, you'll see how it changes each time. Bolder, I didn't see a heck of a lot of bold in that bolder. Lighter, okay, lighter almost looks the same as normal. Yeah, they pretty much do in this case. Lighter is relative, which means it's going to just apply a little bit lighter than what the previous one was. And then we've got these 100s to 900. 100 being the thinnest, 900 being the most bold, and in between you'll see that as I go through here, it's really hard to tell because there's not that big a difference among some of them, but you'll see that the boldness tends to change a bit. So you can decide how bold you want to have. And I would suggest, going back to this previous example here, come on screen, that perhaps what you'd want to do, the easiest way to do it would be to come back out here and rather than do it this way, create one just called dot normal, create one called dot thick, another one dot thicker. Why? Those are classes, and the reason is instead of only being able to use them on a P, you could use them on any tag that you want to at any point in time. The next one we're going to take a look at is the font family. Now the font family tag is used to pick a particular font out that we want our website to use, but be very careful folks, this is a little bit misleading. When you pick a unique font out, that font does not follow your web page. That font has to be on the client's computer already. If it's not already in the client's computer, their browser is going to grab the first font that it sees, and it may not be a font that you want. So really what you want to do is go out and research safe fonts. A safe font is a font that you know is going to be across the board. It's going to work on most any platform, a Mac, a PC. It's also going to be available through any of the browsers, be it Apple Safari all the way over to the generic Chrome to Microsoft's new replacement for Internet Explorer. So you want to research that out. There's obvious fonts that you're going to use that will be safe among all environments. An example of a safe font would be Arial. Seggio is an example. One that you wouldn't want to probably use is one like Wingdings. Wingdings is not across the board. Now later you're going to find out that there are some tricks that you can use in the future to actually pass a font, that if you want to use a unique font, to pass a font to the client. But in standard HTML, we cannot do that now. So stay hungry, and you'll see that later. But right now, always try to pick a web-safe font. Let's take a look at this example here. So in this one, we're applying to every P tag that exists on the website. We're going to make the font family be Times Roman. Now normally you'll see these guys do not have quotation marks around them, and the reason is they don't have spaces in the name. If the font that you're choosing has spaces in the name, okay, then you have to put quotation marks around it. Otherwise it's going to look for a Times font and then wonder what this new is floating around. But when you enclose it with quotation marks, it will work. Now notice that I have multiple fonts here as well. Now what this does is this allows me to replace fonts, which means that if the computer that I send this to, the browser that this is running on, does not see that there exists a Times New Roman font, it will then default it to a Georgia font. If the Georgia font doesn't work, then it will default it to a serif font. And if you take a look down below here, you're going to see some different examples of how, that's probably not, the liver is probably not the best thing to see here, how we can apply different fonts and different versions. Virtually every browser out there today will deal with the font family that exists out there. And you'll see that we can use names like Times, Courier, Arial. There are generic fonts that we don't normally use where we can say pick the first serif font that you find, or the sans without serif font if you want. But really the better thing is to do is to go back in and look for the concept of web safe fonts themselves. Let's talk a little bit about font style. The font style is really another way of applying italics, and the opposite of italics, if it angles the other direction, is called oblique. And you can get this same thing right now with the EM tag, the emphasis tag. In the old days, we used to use the I tag. I tag was deprecated. The EM tag today will do exactly the same thing, but if we want to control the italics, we don't have to use the EM tag. We can apply that to any tag that we want and make that entire tag italics. But if we want, I would suggest we do the same thing with bold. We create those standalone tags so we can apply it, or standalone classes, so we can apply it to anything. Let's take a look at an example of this guy. Let me close out my previous ones here. And you'll see the same thing holds true here. Is we have a normal font which says turn off all italics or oblique if they exist. We have another one that turns on italic and one that turns on oblique. Now, at the time that I'm recording this lecture, not all browsers understand what a backwards italic is. It angles it backwards. So you might find that some browsers do not display oblique. They're not going to display garbage. They just don't do it at all in here. In this case, they're applying it to every P. They're applying a P dot normal. So there's a normal class you'd apply to the P tag to get the normal text out. Again, if you took the P out, you could apply normal, italic, and oblique to anything, which is probably a wise choice when you're working. Font size. Font size is going to take a little bit more time to talk about because there's so much we can do with font size. And really, it's exactly what it says. How big a font do I want to deal with? And there's a lot of different settings within the font. What we're going to find out, and I'm going to talk about this in a couple of minutes, is there's different types of settings. We can have what's called an absolute example or a relative example. An absolute example of a font size says this is exactly what I want the font to do. I want it to be a specific medium font, which is a font built into the browser, or specifically a large or extra large, or I want my font to be this many pixels or inches or points or picas or centimeters, and that's a specific size, and it doesn't matter which one you pick. But there's also relative sizes out there. So and relative says whatever the current font size is, the relative size is either going to make it bigger or smaller based on the current size. So I could actually go back in there and say, I want my font to be 200%. 200% of what? 200% of what the current font is. Okay, so if the current font is 10 point, it's going to increase that by, and again, I'm not sure if doubling it by 200% would make it a 20 point, but it would then increase it. Larger just makes it larger than what it is. Smaller makes it smaller. And then we got these weird little guys called M's and X's. And M says that you take the standard size M, the way it is, and you increase that M by a certain size. So if I said 2 M's, I'm really doing 200% basically. The X's are the opposite. It says take the size of the average X, and whatever that is, increase it by, and I could do 5, and I would get 5 times what EX is. So very similar to the percent. But we have all these different settings that we can use. You want to be careful with the relative sizes. And the reason you want to be careful with relative sizes is that you don't know it's relative to that current text, that font. So if you're looking at it, you might be looking at it on a tablet, you might be looking at it on an iPhone, you might be looking at it on a desktop, and they're not going to look the same. So you're probably going to want to play around with it. This is one where the 130 class will come in later and talk a little bit more about design styles. So here's an example where they're using H1s are all going to be 250%, which means is whatever the current font size is, of the H1, it's going to increase that font size by 2.5 times. Now, we don't have to use those kinds of methods, though. we have all of these different examples down here, as I pointed out, that we can use. So let's take a look at an example of, let's see, let's do percentage, which is we've got up above here. In fact, it's great because they merge them all together anyway. So you'll see that they have 50% selected. That's what you get with 50%. It's a pretty tiny font. If I went to 150%, you'll see how much larger that brings it up. And notice that both fonts tend to change. And the reason is these are enclosed, and we'll talk about a div here in a minute. These are enclosed in a div. So whatever this font currently is, it's going to increase by 50%, and whatever, or decrease in this case by 50%, and this font will decrease by 50%. If I do 150, both fonts increase by 150%, but notice they're not the same because they started off at different sizes. So therein lies the relative aspect of it. If I wanted to go back in and do specific sizes, though, I could do, these are examples of pixels. So I'm saying here that I want my font size to be 20 pixels. This tends to be the one that I use the most. And if I want it to be a 40 pixel size, I can just change it to 40. Will it let me do it over here? I believe. Let's try out. It's not going to let me edit in this case. But had I changed that to 40, then basically I would have doubled the font size over here, just like if I change it to 10, then I decrease the font basically in half. There is a place for the relative sizing, and you'll do that a little bit later, but right now I suggest we focus on the specific sizes. Let's continue on here. Colors and backgrounds. So within the next couple of slides, let's talk a little bit about colors and backgrounds, a little bit on graphics as well. I think it's important to understand, though, that when we're talking about colors and backgrounds, that we need to talk about what is it that we want to have as our color and our background. And what we'll find is we can apply colors and backgrounds now to anything. In old HTML, we were really limited on backgrounds and foreground colors. But what we're going to find out now is on a paragraph tag, I can have a background image on a paragraph tag if I want to. Not sure if I would or not, but I could. So let's take a look at some examples here. First of all, let's talk about colors. We played with colors a little bit, but there's different ways that we can implement colors into HTML. First of all, there are 256 named colors. Really, to get down to the nitty-gritty, there's 17.6 million different colors that we can choose from, and I'll explain why that is in a minute. Of those 17.6 million different colors, 256 of those colors have names that we can use, like red, green, blue. Now, what about those other colors that are not of the 256? How do we get to them? Well, there's a couple of different ways we can get to them. If you go back out, and we're going to take a look at our website in a minute, we can actually plug in the hexadecimal version of it. This right here is the older way of doing it. And every color that we deal with has a hexadecimal value, and that's one way to do it. Probably not the choice today if you're doing it from scratch. Today, I would suggest that we're either going to use a color by name or a color triplet down below or percent intensity. The color names are important because of those 256 color names, I believe there's about 216 colors today that are considered what we call web-safe colors. And a web-safe color is a color like red, which is a web-safe color, that I know red on a PC is going to be the same thing, on a Mac is going to be the same thing, on an iPhone is going to be the same thing if I was running on a Linux box. They're called web-safe colors because you can depend upon that color to be exactly what you're telling it should be. Now, there's only 216 colors, though, approximately, that are web safe. Those other colors above the 216 up to the 17.6 million different colors out there are not web safe. You can open one of those colors up on a PC and it may look different on a Mac. So in most cases, you're going to try to use web-safe colors as much as possible, but sometimes it's not a big deal. I mean, if the background color of a page is subtly different, it may not matter. But let's continue on and let's talk about this decimal triplet down here. In the computer world, colors are made up of three entries, three different types: red, green, and blue. So think about it as having three different beakers. And in each beaker, I can put a certain amount of red, a certain amount of green, and a certain amount of blue. And by mixing those together, I come up with a new color. So what this color triplet is right here is every color, well, first of all, these colors are represented by red, by green, and by blue. And the way it works is, with the color triplet, is there is, if I'm going to have a beaker, I would say that beaker has a measurement. I can either put 0 to 255 in it. Now, 0 being no color whatsoever, so if I wanted no red at all, because red is the first one here, the 255, I put 0 in there. It just so happens right now that what we're looking at with 255, 0, 0 is pure red, no green, and no blue. Now, if I want, we're going to take a look at that here in a second, but I could come out and say I wanted 50, 30, 20. That would be 50 red, 30 green, 20 blue. And whatever that comes out to be, that is how we mix it together. So the way I like to look at it is I've got a beaker, and the beaker is 0 to 255, red, green, and blue, and I can mix any of those colors together to come up anything I want. That means that there's 256 possibilities per color. The amount of intensity, 0 to 255. If you take 256, multiply it times 256 times 256, that's where you come up with those 17.6 million different colors that exist out there in the spectrum. Again, the odds of us using 17.6 million different colors is pretty remote, but they're available to us nonetheless. So that's using the beaker method right here. This bottom one deals with intensity. So rather than the measurement being 0 to 255, we're allowed to use percentages. So I could say make this 70% red, 30% green, 20% blue, see what color I end up with. And so the measurement obviously is 0 to 100%. Which one of these is correct? Again, it's 6 of one, half dozen of the other. Whichever one you choose to use is up to you. Now let me take you to a website here. I think I've got this set up. I've got a couple of different websites. First of all, here's a website that displays the web-safe colors here. And what I would really like is not only if they put down the hexadecimal and the RGB. This is where I can put either the numbers in or the percentages. So they're telling me black right now. This is black, is 0 red, 0 green, and 0 blue. That's pure black. If I go to the bottom down here, I'm going to get pure white, and I'm going to see that white is the presence of all the colors. So pure red, pure green, and pure blue will give me white. Let's look back up here at red. So here's an example of red. Red, if you look it up hexadecimally, is FF0000. If you choose to use that methodology, that's up to you. I would suggest you find a website, though, and there's many of them out there that will help you do the conversion, something like this site. Here's how I would implement it if I was putting it in the color triplet, 25500, as we saw in the slide before, or I would do perhaps 100%, 0%, 0%. And let's take a look at a yellow color up here. Well, let's see, do I even have pure yellow here? It's hard to tell. Look at these measurements here. This is 204, 153, 102, and whatever this color is I come up with. These should have names on them that I could use as well as these guys down here. But this is a good example of all the different web-safe colors, and you can expect every color that you're looking at here to be the same under every browser, under every platform. Let's continue on over here. Now I'm on Wikipedia here, and I've just looked up web-safe colors and web colors in here, and it's talking to you a little bit about how to implement. And you're seeing over here the percentages if you want to. So this is a different way of looking at it. Here is the hexadecimal colors that you would use, and here's the color name. Certainly, if the color name exists, I would use it. Okay. And this is a good page if you want to play around with applying different colors on your page, how you might do it. Okay. And I think that pretty much covers that slide. Let's continue on over here. Now, what if we want to change the background color or perhaps even the foreground color? These examples are background color of a particular region or a tag. So what this first one does here is it says, look, every P tag on my web page now is going to have a background color of yellow automatically. Every unordered list is going to have a background color of whatever 0 red, 0 green, and whatever 100 blue is going to be, some bluish type color. And then down here, it says the background color is going to be in a hexadecimal format. This is the old way that we used to do it, but I think you're going to find that most developers today will pick among these methods or use the percentage method. And actually, this is probably, these two methods are the better methods. If it's a web safe color, use the name. If it's not a web, and all the common names of colors, folks, yellow, red, green, blue, those are going to obviously be web safe colors, and you can use them just as they sit. And how do you know? Try out the name and see if it works. Okay, now let's talk a little bit about lists. I told you before that we use lists in order. We did a previous list where we did 1, 2, 3. I think we did, we were dealing with fruits, and we listed them out. We took a look at ordered lists and unordered lists, and I told you later that we have a lot of control in order to dictate what a list look like. By default, lists are numbered with just standard bullets, a dark bullet, or they have a 1, 2, 3, a numeric 1, 2, or 3 base 10 system in front of it. But I can control exactly what that UL or the OL looks like. And here's how I might do it. I have my UL tag here, and then I have what's called a list style type. And inside my list style type, I could use any one of these keywords, and each one of these relates to what we have below. So if I want to change my, in this case, it's really weird, but even though this is an unordered list, I can make it act just by applying style, just like an ordered list. Once I apply style, I can override any of this stuff. This probably should be an OL up here because I'm going to apply ordered here, this being the unordered list down below. But it wouldn't really matter. I mean, actually, if I do a UL here and I say list style type, and I told it that I want to have a decimal leading 0, instead of having an unordered list, it will make that unordered list act like an ordered list, and my numbers will look like this. The default is decimal, just like this, but I could use upper Roman, lower Roman, upper alpha, and lower alpha if I want to, and I combine those together if I want. Or if I want to have bullets inside of them, I could use circle, which is going to give me a circle like that, a disk, which is pretty much the default, and actually I think that this is a typo here. That should be, I believe, a square in here. And I can implement any of those. Let's take a look at an example here. So on this screen, what I've done, I'm taking some examples of what we've done before. I said that I want to treat my list differently. I have lists inside of a list here. So notice, here's my outside UL, but inside I have another UL, and inside of that I have another UL. So basically what I'm trying to do is to create something that looks similar to this right here. So that doesn't use the default. Probably it would be better in my example if these were ordered lists, but again, it tells you that I can make even an unordered list act like an ordered list. So in this case it says, look, if you're the outside UL, make it Roman numeral. Here's the outside UL here. This is the outside UL. So any LI that's inside of that, and there's only 2 right now, will be Roman numeral. Again, how do I know that? Because it's the UL that stands by itself. But this guy says, look, if you have a UL inside of another UL, which is this guy right here, okay, there's my list, and I'm putting a list in a list, then I want that guy to be upper alpha right here. So that means subtopic 1, subtopic 2, and subtopic 3 down here will be upper alpha. But inside I have a third level unordered list. And inside that third level unordered list, that's a UL and a UL and a UL, I'm now making that decimal, which is basically the default. And that's where I end up with these guys right here. So I've got a lot of control over those lists if I want to. As far as graphics, I can also go back in and using this example here, I'm telling it what specific graphic I want. But I can actually go back in, as it states here, and I can use a graphic file. So in this case, what I would do is I would say UL list style image, and then I put UL where the word image is. That's going to represent the JPEG or the GIF that I'm going to use. So instead of having image here, I might have, my bullet.gif or what have you. The other thing that I can do is I can control where that bullet sits. If you look at this slide, you'll notice the bullet here always sits on the outside, but I can change that by changing the bullet to from outside to inside if I choose to. So I can change the alignment of it. Let's take a look at CSS lists here and see what that demonstration is going to produce for us. There's my CSS lists in here. Okay, so before I transpose this, notice what I've got here is I've got some styles and I've got the UL, and I'm saying from now on the UL bullet is going to be on the outside. We'll play around with that in just a second here. And I want arrow.gif to be my bullet. That means that arrow.gif better be, there it is right there, better be within my web page. Notice I put apostrophes around it as well. So let's transpose this, see what it looks like. Okay, so notice how I have these arrows right here. Those were grabbed from that graphic. Where is it at? Arrow.gif right here. If I was to open that up, that is that graphic. Now one little note here. Your graphic that's going to be your bullet has to be pretty small. If you make it too large, you're gonna cause these guys over here, your pieces of data, to be separated out. Okay. Now, before I go on, I'm not sure, because I'm using a graphic here, if inside is going to make it different. But let's just see what happens here if I change this to inside. Yeah. See, in this particular case, it's not going to make much of a difference. Let me see if I take my style out here. Let's take the arrows out here. Let me just pull this guy out real quickly here. Okay, so let's see what ends up happening now. So there they are on the outside. Let's try to go back in, oh, excuse me, on the inside. Let's put them on the outside. It just tended to move them just a little bit closer in this particular case. So one of those we'll have to play around with a little bit. Now again, notice that this is an unordered list here, yet I've got it creating these bullets. Let's just real quickly go back, and I'm going to go back to my slide here, and I'm going to grab a style that I've previously created. I'm going to copy it, come back over here, and I'm going to paste this in here. So now I've got this unordered list. I'm going to delete this code out right here. Let's just leave it in here for right now. See what that's going to do for us. So let's clean this up just a little bit. Okay. And now notice what happens. I have Roman numerals, but I have an unordered list. It didn't care. Remember, it didn't care whether I have this as an OL. So let's change these to OLs here, which I could do. And you're going to see it makes no difference because the style overwrote what the original UL was doing. Let's talk a little bit about formatting hypertext links as well. One of the great things you can do with style sheets is you can make your page look pretty pizzazzy, and there's some settings that we can do to control how we deal with hypertext links. Normally, a hypertext link is going to be, a standard link will be blue. If you visited that link and you click on it, it's going to be purple. And if you're visiting it, you're going to have it as yellow text, which means if you have a child page, you open up, your background page link will turn yellow. You can also create rollover effects, and let's just take a look at what that's going to look like here. So I have different hypertext styles. Now these are pseudo styles. Usually, folks, we're going to go back in and create our own style, but in this case what we found out is we've got a :visited. This is a unique thing for this tag. We have an :link, an :active, and an :hover. So these are all elements of the A tag, and what I can do is I can tell it the visited tag is going to look like this. The current link tag will look like this, which is by the way default blue text with an underline on it. The active link, which is yellow, will look like this, but now they've added this extra one down below called the hover link, and that says that when I roll my mouse over this A tag, this is what I'm going to want it to look like right here. So let's take a look here at an example. So I've got an A hover here that says when I hover over a link, I want that link to be a green text, and I want it to become uppercase character, an uppercase character. Let's take a look at rollover.html here. Okay. So I've got rollover here. So notice what I've placed over here. I've got this link to the White House right now. Okay, I've got this link to the White House, and when I click on White House, notice how it changes. See that programmatic side of it right there? Okay, so where did that come from? Well, first of all, my default color of my link is just blue. Notice there's no underline on it, so my current link is going to be a blue text decoration none. We looked at text decoration a minute ago, and notice what I'm doing is I'm telling it from now on my hypertext links are not going to have an underline on it. Not sure if I want to do that or not, but in this example I did. Okay. Then I say an active link is going to be orange. If I've already visited that link, we'll see that in a second, it's going to be maroon. But when I take my mouse and I hover over it, and by the way, you want to put these guys in this exact order right here. You have to put them in this order top to bottom. But when I hover over it, I want the color of the text to turn white, but I want the background color to turn black, and I still want no underline on it right here. Okay, so watch this. Again, this is what happens. Now, I mean, I can do all kinds of stuff. Let's say I don't want it to turn white. Maybe I want it to turn silver. And I can do that. Silver is a color name there. Okay, and let's see what happens. It's hard to tell it's not white, but that's a silver color. I suppose I could probably do something like red to make it really stand out. Okay, and there's your red. So this is kind of a cool little feature. It lets you modify your hypertext links, and not only can you do that, you can actually add borders later. So I could put a border around this and make it look just like a standard button. We talked earlier about units of measurement, and HTML5 provides a variety of units of measurement that we can use in any size. We can use this to size borders, to size fonts, to size region. We can do all kinds of stuff with it. And we're going to find, as I mentioned earlier, that there's two types of sizes, a relative size and an absolute size. Relative sizes say increase the size based on whatever it is right now. If the current size is 20 and I increase it by 100%, I'm going to come up with a size of 40. Whereas absolute size, which is typically the way you're going to do it, not always, but typically, you get to go back in and say, this is exactly what I want my font to be and size-wise. Let's take a look at some examples of the units of measurement here. Oh, let's try that again here. Uh-oh, lost myself. There we go. My units of measurement. Oh, you know what it did is it did not make this into a hypertext link. So give me just a moment here, and I have to grab that out, copy it, come back to my browser window, and let's paste that in. And that's not what I copied. Let's try that one more time. There we go. And what you get here is an example of all the different units of measurement that you can use. You can have your absolute sizes, or here's examples of the relative sizes that you deal with, and some examples of playing with it. So I'd suggest maybe you spend a little bit of time and you play around with it. Generally, you're going to find that in most cases you're going to stick with certain sizes. In my case, I tend to use percentages if I have to use a relative, but in most cases I'm going to try to stick with absolute sizes, and I'm going to use pixels or the PX if I'm dealing with sizes. And you can play around with those a little bit. This table shows you which browsers are compatible with which sizes, and today you're going to find most all browsers are going to be compatible with most all sizes out there. Let's pause a minute and talk a little bit about the W3 Schools site as well as their support for Cascading Style Sheets. We've already seen that they do support for HTML. In fact, the W3 is one of the governing bodies over HTML and CSS, so they're the obvious people to put out what the white papers are, which is the basic behind HTML, as well as the tutorial site. So again, the W3 Schools is a tutorial site that they have. Their primary tutorials, the primary tutorials are on HTML and cascading style sheets, although you're going to find, as I mentioned earlier, they have a variety of different lectures that exist out there. The page that I have open right now is the Cascading Style Sheets reference, and this is a page that I want you to spend, you might even want to pause the lecture here in a couple of minutes and spend some time getting to know this site. In fact, I would spend a minimal of a half hour just playing around with this site, going back in and taking a look over here on the left hand side at the different Cascading Style Sheet properties that we can play with. Everything from align content all the way down to the very end z-index, and z-index is what we would use later if we want to stack images on top of each other and be able to tell it a particular layer perhaps that we want to pull up. But you'll see all the way through here all the different tags that we played with before exist in here. You'll see that, let's find the text. There's text decoration. Text decoration deals with the overline, the underline. There is an overline which covers across the top of the browser. I think most of these don't work, but again, they all have try it yourself. So in some of my exercises that I might give you, I might ask you to incorporate some cascading style sheets that we might not have talked specifically about within our lectures. This is the site I'd expect you to go to in order to produce that output, in order to solve the problem. And I use this site all the time. And as I mentioned before, I'm not a look and feel person. I'm more of the guy that develops the guts behind the program, the business logic, if you will. But I find myself having to go back in and do style sheet changes quite often, or at least make recommendations and style sheet changes. So even if you don't plan on being a designer, you're just simply going to be a programmer that has to generate HTML, you're still going to want to have some good knowledge, a good foundation of cascading style sheets. So again, I would suggest at some point here you pause the lecture and you play around with the site. Go back in and do the try it yourselves. That's the only way that you're going to learn well what is happening. I'd like to pause and talk to you about two unique tags, the div tag and the span tag. And you're going to see these tags very common, especially when you're dealing with style sheets. What's interesting about the div tag is the div tag actually has no format of its own. You could surround text with a div tag, an opening div and a closing div, and absolutely nothing will happen within that text. A div, again, is used to surround multiple tags of text, or at least one tag or more tags of text. We'll take a look at the span tag in just a second. But again, as I mentioned, the div tag does nothing on its own. The sole purpose of the div tag is for me to go back in and apply cascading style sheets into that. Let's take a look at an example of this one that I have open here. So what I've done is I've taken this amendments page that we've been working on for a while here, and you'll notice that inside here I have a free floating class. So I created this class called .highlight, and I said when I implement .highlight on any tag I want, because it's not associated with any tag up front here, that I want the background color of that region to turn silver. So let's go ahead and take a look at what this is going to look like. And again, as I'm resolving this, the div tag here, notice, is made to surround multiple tags. So here I'm turning my div tag on, right at this point, right there, which you're going to see is right above Amendment 1. Now look at what we've got with Amendment 1 right here. I've got all of this region up here with a background color of silver. Now, how did I do that? Well, notice right here in this div, I created this class and I said apply the highlight, which again came from my embedded style sheet up above. Now, if I look down past 10 down here, notice, where is it at? In fact, let me do it the quick way. Let's do a control find. And I'm going to find my slash div here. Oh, where did it go? Where did my div go? Well, I guess I have to search it then. So there's 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So right here, if we take a look down where it ends right after the X, and here is my closing div. So if I look above here, my div is surrounding all of these tags right here. So there it is being turned on, and there it is being turned off, and this is what we end up with right here. And I could make a lot more changes into it, but what I'm showing you is this div is simply a beginning marker and an ending marker. Sometimes you'll hear the term div referred to as a wrapper. We're going to wrap this div around a whole bunch of different text. And there's a lot of different uses you're going to find for the div. But what they did, and we're going to talk a little bit about this later, is in HTML, they realized that in designing, there's different regions of a page that we might want to have stand out. The header, maybe the footer, maybe we have an article within a document. So what has happened with HTML5 is, and again, I'm going to show you this towards the end of this lecture, is they've gone back in and they've created custom tags. The headers, the footers, they're exactly like divs. They do the same thing div does. The only difference you're going to find with those is that search engines will be able to read the header or read the footer, but functionally they have no impact on their own. I could surround a header or a footer just like I can a div, and they do absolutely nothing. But they're there to force a standardization among design that HTML5 developers think that we need to have. Now, before I go on, I want you to note down that I had created this free-floating class that, well, let's go back up here, right here, that I called dot highlight. Just to show you that I can implement that at any place I want. Let's go down below this, and if you look right here, rather than doing it to a div, I put that highlight now to this amendment 12, and you'll see that right down here. That's how this ended up getting highlighted, and I could apply it to anything I wanted to. I could apply it just to this one paragraph right here. That's the beauty behind these free-floating classes. And I should mention one thing here. As an old-time developer, I was used to using bold, the B tag, and the I tag for italics. I've seen a lot of developers go out there and create free-floating classes that they'll call bold and they'll call italics. And rather than use the EM tag or the tag I'm going to show you in a second, what they'll do is they'll simply go back in and apply that highlight to any region that they want. Let's expand on that because there's a little bit more that I want you to see. Let's come back in and take a look at the span tag. Now the span tag is very much like the div tag, but the div tag surrounds a block or blocks of text, meaning that it surrounds a complete tag, a paragraph tag, or a couple of paragraph tags, or a heading and a paragraph tag, but nonetheless it's surrounding a group of different entities. The span tag, on the other hand, has a different use. The span tag is really used to be within a given tag, and this is used to change text that might happen in that tag. For example, a div tag might surround the several paragraphs, but that span tag might just surround a single word or a sentence within that paragraph. So it's made for smaller pieces of information that are embedded within a given tag. But again, the span and the div tag function just about identically. Let's pull up that span example that I have out here. See how that works. So I'm going to go ahead and let's resolve this and see what we're looking at. Close out some of these other examples. And notice what I did here is I wanted my page to have something that looked like it was being highlighted, something that really stands out. So in this case, I chose to highlight in yellow abridging the freedom of speech right there. So how can I just do that little tiny region as that? Well, what I did, and let's find that's under Amendment 1, so here's my Amendment 1. Look right here that I did. So I've got that opening span tag, and I've got a closing span tag right in the middle of this DD tag right here. It could be in the middle of anything. We'll take a look at it here in a minute. But what I do is I've now got this free-floating class called emphasize here. And emphasize now takes the color red text with the background color. This is RGB, so this is a yellow. Red, green, and blue. If you have pure red and pure green, you end up with a yellow color. I could have used the keyword yellow as well here. I didn't have to use that, and probably should have put a semicolon at the end of that to be a little bit more consistent, as well as the end of these. I can see that they're not required, but it's probably pretty good practice to make sure you do put your semicolons in at the end of your styles. Maybe down the road it will be required by the future browsers because it is a suggested rule right now, but it may become a specific rule. So again, going back, I put that emphasis right here, but I could very easily have highlighted anything else down here. In fact, I could have said, you know what, I want this Amendment 3 right here to stand out. So I would find my amendment 3 right here, and I could put my span right in the middle of that. In fact, I'm just going to go ahead and copy this because I'm a lazy typist here. I could put my span right here around that text alone. And let's see here, span, class emphasis. It didn't change it, so let's go ahead and refresh it here. And there you go. Oh, look at that, I made a mistake. I forgot to close my span. Now you probably saw that when I was typing that in. So let's go back to 3, and there it is right there. There's my mistake. Let's put that slash back in again, and hopefully, looks like I'm going to have to go back and refresh. So let's close that guy out and reread it again, and hopefully that's cleaned it up a bit. Now the problem is I've messed up my H2. So let's go back again. So there's one tag, there's one tag. Oh, I lost my opening or my less than symbol for my H2. Save it just to make sure. And it's too bad that that's not refreshing immediately, but I'll just go back here and refresh in my browser. And hopefully I didn't mess it up this time. Of course I did. So let's go back and take a look again. This is a good, at least a good exercise in troubleshooting. So there's my opening span, class equals emphasize, closing tag. There's my extra tag right there. What I did is when I put the span tag in, remember I lost this tag here, that's it right there. I just put the span in the wrong location. So if I get rid of that guy, I'm just going to save it again. And let's go back in and close these guys out. See what it looks like. Yep, 4 times the charm here. So you see how that free-floating class can be moved anywhere I want at any time. And really one of the things that you're going to do, folks, is I would recommend that you're going to build your own custom style sheet. You're going to build the tags that you want to use down the road. You might want to build a highlight tag like this. You might want, and later you'll just copy that from website to website. So you don't have to redo that in the future. Once it's built, that's going to be your look and feel. And what's interesting is you can have a common look and feel that you use among all your clients, but they won't look the same because you can change background colors, regions. Even though it's the same common CSS, the graphics and the colors are going to make them look totally different. So let's continue on here. So I mentioned before that there's some new HTML5 tags, and I introduced them earlier, but what I really want you to understand now is these new tags like footer, header, the details, the main, really have no programmatic input on your program. No different than if I surround a div around some text with no CSS on it, that div does absolutely nothing. The footer, the header, the details, and the main do absolutely nothing, but what they do is they're implemented by HTML5 to force some standardization. They're saying this is where you're going to put the header, and then what you can do is go back and apply your style to the header itself. And make the header look any way you want it to look. Again, the other advantage, though, of these tags is that the new search engines or the new algorithms in the search engines, such you'd find at Google or at Bing, use these tags to look for information. So it's important to understand, and this slide gives you an example here of how I might want to format my footer. So the bottom text shows how my footer might be in there. That reads, this is my footer, and if I wanted that to have a silver text to be centered and then be a Segio UI font, then that's how I might format it, as you see there, and only that footer tag, anything between the opening and closing footer tag, would be formatted. Let's talk a little bit about block level elements. We've experienced a lot of block level elements. Block level elements are tags that you open, you put some kind of information in between it, and then you close that tag off. So heading tags, the paragraph tag, the block quote tag, which indents text, but we're probably not going to want to use that later. We're going to use margins, which are innate within CSS. Unordered lists or ordered lists, or even inside the lists themselves, the li tags, or if you're looking at those definition lists, the DLs, the DTs, the DDs, or the tag that we just looked at, the div or the span, all of these tend to be what we call block level elements. And what happens is we, by applying a style to the opening tag of that block, we're impacting that entire block. And by being a block, it opens the doors to a lot of different styles that we can manipulate. Things like margins, or we can put borders around it, or we can pad the inside of it so that things don't push up right against it. So if I've got an image and I do padding, I can tell that image, don't let text come maybe within 30 pixels of my image. And that again is a standard style. So some of the types of block level commands that we can deal with are things like margins. And margins again will force space above or to the right or to the bottom or to the left of any element that we have. So on this slide that we have, the example says is take my LI, and I always want my left margin to be equivalent to 2 M's, whatever my M is at that moment. Really, this is like increasing at 200%. I want my left margin to be 2 M's, and I want my right margin to be 2 M's. Basically what that does is that gives you an indentation and an outdent on the right hand side, so it pushes your text into the center a little bit more. With block level elements, and again, I would recommend that you go back in and you play with these in that W3 schools we just looked at. But within block level elements, we can control things like borders. So I can turn borders on, and I can define the border's top width, the right width, the bottom, or I can use this special border tag that you see just called border width, where it doesn't define it, and I can specify, there's actually some shortcut tags that I can specify the border for all 4 sides. I can go back into the border and tell it, here's what my top color is going to be, or my right color of the border. So all sides of the border could be different colors. In standard HTML, you didn't have that built in. You just had a border, and the border had a color, and that was it. So we can control all aspects of the border, and we can also control the style of the border. Is it a solid line? Is it a dotted line? Is it 2 lines that go all the way around? So there's an enormous amount of control just with the borders alone that might exist around a block level. We'll take a look at borders here in a second. But when we're talking about the widths of a border, the widths of the border could be thin, medium, or thick, or I can actually use pixels if I want to. And I can also go back in and talk about the physical look of that border, as I mentioned a minute ago. Is it a solid single line? Is it a dashed line? Is it dots that go around? Is it double? Or does it have dimension? Is it outset or inset? Or does it have groove or ridged images? And if you're interested in those, go back in and play with them and take a look at examples. I know that when you're dealing with blocks out on a W3C, they'll let you put any of these in. Let's take a look at an example I have. I've created this free-floating class that I could use anywhere I want, and I call it box red. And basically, its whole purpose is to set the text red and put an inset border around it. Could add a lot more stuff to it. I could have gone back in there, and if I wanted to, told it that I want the border to be, for example, dotted. Or I could tell it how thick I want that border to be. Let's just take a look at this example. So here's my borders right here. Let's look at an example of it and see what it's producing. And this is using box red. And I'm also using a div tag in here, as I can see. So let's see what this is going to give us. So right off the bat, if we take a look up here, when I created box red, I told it that I want the text. So color refers to the text. So anything within this box that I'm defining, and it's going to be assigned in this case to a div, is going to have red text, it's going to have a dashed border, and I want to have a margin on the left of 2 M's, a margin on the right of 4 M's. So what it basically did is it pushed it in 2 M's here, and it pushed it to the left here, 4 M's, gave me that center. And now notice that my borders have different colors on it, right? So notice that I have my border left is black, but my border color is silver. So I set the default border color to silver, but I said only make that left border right here black. And look what it's ended up doing here. It gave me that dimension to it. It's pretty slick on how that works. Let's go back in here and let's just say we wanted a solid border here. So if I simply type in solid, Oh, I like the fact when it changes, now I end up with my solid border immediately around it. Okay. Or let's take a look at what we've got in that slide again here. Let's back up here. And let's say that I want to have, change my border width. Let's see what ends up happening here. So let's go back to my border, and let's set right here, let's put border width. And in here, let's just do a thick one. Let's start off with 5 pixels. And there's my 5 pixel border right there. And if I wanted to increase it, I can make it, let's make it a really thick border, 15 pixel border. And look at the dimension. This is where I ended up with those colors around it, because it makes it look like it's standing out. And I could apply that style to anything, that box red. Let me prove that here. Let's say that what I want to do now is to my heading here. This is my heading right here. I want this H1 to be box red as well. So for the H1, because it's a free floating class, I can apply that to anything I want. So let's find that again, my heading. And I'm simply going to type in class equals, and inside the quotation marks I'm going to do box red. And if I spell it right, click outside of it, spell it right again, and there's my box red up there. So you see how easy, and it doesn't just have to be that. I can apply it to anything. I believe, let's put it on, let's see if it'll let me do it on this American flag. Let's see how far it will let me go. Okay, so I'm going to grab that same code that I just added here, and let's add it to our image tag and see what happens to our image. Right here, within the image tag. See, I can apply it to anything. I applied it to that image, and it put that box around the flag. So pretty much anything I can apply it to. It's a pretty easy command. Borders are really nice. Sometimes they can get a little bit irritating, but I use borders quite a bit to segregate information on a page. So here's the example we were just taking a look at just a moment ago. This was an inset example, and this shows you how the box red could be applied around a div. Okay. We can also deal with padding. So again, what padding does is that pushes the, I guess let's take a look here. I think I can show you a little bit better example. When we're over here looking at this page right here, let's look at that again resolved. What I want to do is I want to talk about this margin versus padding. Margin says from either the left side of the browser or the right side of the browser, or within that object itself, give me spacing outside of the element. It doesn't belong to the element, meaning that it's going to happen before the div occurs and after the div occurs. Whereas if we're dealing with padding, we're talking about padding that would occur between here and the border here. So how much space do I want to give that around this element, the padding? So let's go back and take a look at that slide here, and you notice here we're giving a padding to an image of 2 ems. Let's go back in and let me try that. I'm going to grab that off of my slide and on my other monitor here. Let's cut that out, and I'm going to copy, and let's come back over to our code here. And what I'm doing here is I'm going to implement right here. I'm telling it now that any image will automatically have a padding of 2 ems, or 2 times the size of the average uppercase M. Okay, so let's see what impact that's going to have, and I'm going to take this class off. Well, let's just see what it's going to look like with the class on for right now, and we'll play around with it. So what's going to happen, folks, is the first thing it's going to do is it's going top to bottom is it's going to see this image, and it's going to add and say any image that's going to be placed on this page, because I'm putting it to the image tag, any image is going to have a 2M border around it. So that's automatic. But when it got down here, it knew that the image had a 2M border on it, but it also included box red. So the box red, because it's inline, would have overwritten anything else that was applied. So that's the space that we see right here. That's the 2M space. If I was to put the letter M in here, the uppercase M that's equivalent here, it would be the uppercase version of this character. I would put 2 side by side here, and that's the equivalent of this space. And I can prove that. Let's go back and change it to a 1M here. Okay, there's a 1M. Okay, or if I wanted to change it, I could use pixels. Now remember, the M's and the X's are relative. That means it's going to take whatever the current font size is, and it's going to increase it. If I change this to pixels, now 1 pixel is tiny. But you see, look what happens here. As soon as I put that 1 pixel in, you see that little white line that appears around it. Let's change it to, and that's a specific, let's change it to a 5 and see what happens. See how that space, this is really nice that you see these changes happen immediately over here. Okay, so it gives you an idea what padding is. So margins, on the other hand, will, and let's change the margin over here. I think I got margin set up on here. Yeah. So here I've got a margin left of 2M's right here. Let's go back in and change this to 4M's and see what happens immediately. And so I'm impacting the box red. See what happened? It affected it over here, not in this space. Padding would have affected it in here. Margins affected it over on the left-hand side. Okay, so let's continue on here. I want to stop and talk a little bit. We've looked at the basic concepts, and we're going to play a lot more with style sheets. We've looked at the basic aspect of style sheets, and what you can expect is that throughout time, people have put together their own custom style sheets. I told you a moment ago, you're going to want to build your own styles as you go along. That's going to be your custom look. Well, there's some companies that have put some commercial look and feels together. And 2 different packages you might experience would be Bootstrap or Foundation. And all Bootstrap is a whole bunch of look and feel style sheets that have been put together. And at that point, what people do is they incorporate that look and feel into their website. And it's a really pretty look and feel. Let me take a look at, I think I have an example of Bootstrap. If not, let's go back out there and let's look one up here. Let's come back and see what we can find on Bootstrap. Bootstrap tends to be the one that Microsoft uses the most. And Bootstrap, by the way, works really close with JavaScript later to do some really fancy stuff. But let's take a look and see what Bootstrap has for us here. So it says Bootstrap is the most popular HTML, CSS, and JavaScript framework for developing responsible mobile-first projects on the web. And what it is Bootstrap is just basically a giant style sheet. You can either copy that Bootstrap style sheet into your page, or you can point to a Bootstrap that's existing on their server, so anytime they make a change to their Bootstrap, you're immediately affected by it. Which is the better way to do it? I guess it depends on your implementation. I wouldn't want Bootstrap to make a change to their look and feel that would impact my users negatively on my side. Don't want that to happen. But on the other side of the coin too is I want to have my website have the most, the most current, the most pizzazz to it, and they're going to constantly be updating the look and feel to it. Let's see if I can find real quickly before we break away on this lecture some examples. And let's see what we come up with here. So in here, this is an example of, this is the basic look and feel that you're going to get from Microsoft. If you were to open up and create an ASP.NET web page, Microsoft automatically includes Bootstrap, and you can go back in and modify that Bootstrap if you want. But this is actually very similar to the basic page that they give you, and then you can just go back in there and modify it. So they give you a basic nav bar at the top, and you'll find that most likely this code on this page is coded with those HTML5 components, because that's what gives us our header, that's what gives us our footer down below, that's what gives us we have different articles. These are called articles. And also notice one of the things that Bootstrap gives us, which is really nice, besides that responsiveness, is they allow us to put our information in columns. Let's take a look and see how responsive this guy is and what happens. I would expect this to be very responsive. And keep in mind that responsive means it's not going to look exactly like this as I change. It's going to modify itself to be as usable as possible within that given resolution. So let's see what happens here. Notice how, look at that menu bar across the top. See how this menu bar exists here? Watch what happens when I drop it down. It goes away, but what ends up happening is I end up getting the menu bar over here on the right-hand side, and that's what you would expect to see perhaps on an iPhone or an Android or even any kind of mobile device. And then when you get down to a certain size, that's about as small as it's going to get. But there's the functionality that you get right there, and I could turn off that menu if I want. And so you see it changes how that website looks. See, notice that I still have that search feature. Actually, they took the search feature away, didn't they? They added the search over here. But if I have it widened, and that's almost everything that you're seeing here, folks, is being done with Cascading Style Sheets. There may be a little bit of JavaScript in here, but the vast majority of what you're seeing is Cascading Style Sheets. So as time goes on, folks, we're going to play a lot more. I'll give you a lot of exercises, a couple more videos to look at on CSS. But at this point, what I'd expect you to know is what Cascading Style Sheets is. It's that look and feel. It makes your HTML document look the way it looks. It gives it that pizzazz to it. The colors, the images, the rollover effects, all of that aspect of it is the Cascading Style Sheets. It also gives you that responsiveness. It allows you to code responsiveness so you don't have to have 4 different websites created for 4 different platforms. You've got one website created, whether you're looking at it on an iPhone or whether you're looking at it on a desktop application. CSS is crucial, and we're going to do a lot of practice with CSS as we go along. And in that 130 class that you're going to take after this, you're going to focus on really how to implement it together and making look and feels similar to this. But I will point out that in this class, I will not grade you on the look and feel of your websites. In fact, the vast majority of the websites that you're going to give me would probably fail you if you were in the 130 class. But that's not the focus of this class. Again, the focus of this class is to understand what CSS is, which we did. We understand the 3 different ways to implement it. Inline, which is the least likely you're going to want to do. Very rarely you're going to want to do inline. But you can do inline. More likely you're going to do embedded if it's only affecting that page. Or you're going to want to, most likely, to put it in your external file so that you can use it among all your pages. And again, you can embed it on each page, but that means if you've got 30 pages, you've got 30 places to have to go back to and make those changes, and you don't want to have to do that.